all. My name is Mallory Clark, and I'm the Systems Advocacy Specialist with Hope Harbor, the Rape Crisis Center serving the Barren River Development District. This presentation, titled Serving Survivors, the Relationship Between Hope Harbor and Law Enforcement, is intended to inform officers and staff of Kentucky State Police about Hope Harbor services, Kentucky state laws regarding sexual violence advocacy centers, and the working relationship between state police and Hope Harbor advocates. Please write down any questions, comments, or concerns you may have throughout the presentation, as we will schedule an opportunity to do a live Zoom Q&A session at a later date. Additionally, my contact information will be listed at the end of the presentation, and I will be happy to take any questions you may have through email or over the phone. All Hope Harbor services are paid for in part or entirely by state and federal funds. Before we begin, I do want to give a content warning for discussions of rape, sexual abuse, and sexual violence. I understand that as law enforcement officers, you are regularly exposed to disturbing scenes, both in person and virtually. However, I always operate under the impression that I am speaking to survivors, and the content in this presentation has the potential to trigger anyone impacted by sexual violence. Vicarious trauma is also always a potential, especially in your line of work. Please remember that if you are struggling with vicarious trauma or are a survivor of sexual violence yourself, Hope Harbor services are open to you as well. To start, let's glance at the presentation overview so you know what to expect. First, we'll start with an overview of Hope Harbor services and where our jurisdictions overlap. Then we will discuss other rape crisis centers in post-15's jurisdiction and provide contact information for them as well. After that is a quick overview of advocacy as it's written into Kentucky state law. Then we'll go over Hope Harbor Advocates, who they are and what they do and do not do. Then we will close out with an interview of the relationship between Hope Harbor Advocates and law enforcement and contact information for myself and my agency. So let's jump right into it with an overview of Hope Harbor and our services. Legally, we are known as a rape crisis center, but we call ourselves a sexual trauma recovery center. This is because we serve all people impacted by sexual violence, not just direct survivors. We are one of 13 rape crisis centers serving Kentucky, and we serve the Barren River Area Development District, otherwise known as the BRAD. This includes 10 counties: Allen, Barren, Butler, Warren, Logan, Hart, Edmondson, Simpson, Metcalfe, and Monroe. If you notice, those last two counties are where our service areas overlap and are the reason you are watching this video today. Hope Harbor services are open to anyone in that 10-county area, including folks who have experienced sexual violence within the BRAD but do not reside there. Additionally, if someone was a victim of sexual violence outside the BRAD, but has since relocated to our area, we will work with them as well. We serve survivors at any point in their recovery journey. Survivors can come to us 3 days, 3 months, 3 years, or 3 decades after their experience, and we will serve them just the same. And as I said before, we don't only serve direct survivors. We also provide services to loved ones or community members of survivors, as we recognize that sexual trauma impacts everyone in a survivor's community, not just the direct victim. Additionally, we offer services to anyone who works with survivors and have experiencing vicarious trauma. Vicarious trauma occurs when someone working closely with survivors begins to experience negative mental and emotional outcomes as a result of that work. Working in this field, as you know, is emotionally and mentally taxing, and we are here and ready to support anyone who may be dealing with the repercussions of vicarious sexual trauma. Hope Harbor's main office is located in Bowling Green, but we have satellite offices in Simpson, Logan, and Barren counties. Our Barren County office is located in Glasgow and will likely be the most convenient location for residents of Metcalfe and Monroe. Unfortunately, at this time, we cannot take walk-ins at our Glasgow office. Addresses for all locations are on my final slide. As you can see, our services are listed out on this slide. Before I go over them, I need to point out the most important aspect of our services. They are always 100% free and confidential. We never charge a survivor or their insurance for any service we provide, and under Kentucky state law, we cannot share client information with any outside person or agency without the survivor's direct verbal permission, nor can we respond to subpoenas. The only exception to this are in cases of suspected child or vulnerable adult abuse, or if a client is reasonably believed to be a danger to themselves or others. The privilege allows us to build close, trusting relationships with survivors, and this in turn helps us assist a survivor in starting their recovery journey, no matter what that may look like. I'll now go over each of our services in more detail. Perhaps our most widely utilized service is our counseling office. Hope Harbor has licensed and specially trained counselors who specialize in working with survivors of sexual violence. We offer counseling services at all of our 4 locations. We also offer telehealth services to accommodate survivors with transportation issues and in recognition of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. Clients can come to us in addition to any other therapeutic services they might already use and can start, stop, and restart services at any time. When a client enters the onboarding process, they will typically be seen for 3 crisis counseling sessions by one of our interns, who are overseen and guided by our clinical team. This allows the department to determine which counselor will be the best fit for that client and what the client's direct needs may be. After that, the client will be transferred to a regular therapist. Next is our crisis line. This is the most common way survivors reach out to us. This line is staffed 24/7, 365 days a year, and the majority of the time it is staffed by volunteer advocates for Hope Harbor. We will talk more about our volunteers later on. Survivors sometimes call our line just to process their emotions or their particular situations, and a call does not automatically mean a survivor becomes one of our clients. Survivors can call our crisis line anonymously. We do not track calls unless the survivor willingly gives us the information necessary to do that. We also do not inform any outside agencies about the calls we receive over the crisis line, as that would be a break of confidentiality. The only exception to this rule is in the case that the caller is a danger to themselves or others. In that case, we do reach out to law enforcement. However, aside from that, survivors can utilize the crisis line to receive crisis counseling and advocacy over the phone. Crisis counseling differs from our other counseling services, as every employee and volunteer at Hope Harbor is qualified to provide crisis counseling services. The crisis line is also utilized by our community partner agencies, such as law enforcement and the medical personnel, to request an advocate's presence, make a referral, or request professional development opportunities. This crisis line can dispatch advocates to anywhere in our 10-county district, but most commonly sends advocates to respond to survivors in the medical setting. Another crucial service we provide is direct advocacy. This comes in 2 forms: emergency advocacy and legal advocacy. Emergency advocacy happens in 2 distinct environments. The most common is in the emergency room or hospital following a disclosure. When a survivor presents at the hospital to receive treatment, whether they choose to undergo a safe exam or not, Rape Crisis Center advocates are required by Kentucky state law to present themselves to the survivor at the hospital. The hospital is in turn required to contact our crisis line so an advocate can be dispatched, as previously discussed. While at the hospital, advocates provide information, emotional support, and material support to the survivor while they receive treatment. Advocates cannot leave the hospital or the survivor's room unless the survivor themselves directs us to do so. Survivors are, of course, at liberty to refuse advocacy services at any time, but no other person, be it family or friends, medical staff, or law enforcement, may force an advocate to leave an emergency advocacy setting at any time. The second form of emergency advocacy happens less frequently. If a survivor presents to law enforcement agency to file a report of their assault, they can request an advocate to be present to provide, again, informational, emotional, and material support through the reporting process. Advocates are not legally required to be present in this scenario, unlike hospital advocacy, but can be requested either by the agency or by the survivor. In the case of KSP 15, this may not be necessary since Mary Kate White serves as your in-house victim advocate. However, we would still be willing and able to provide this service if necessary or requested. This is especially pertinent if your victim advocate is unavailable, out of office, on another call, on vacation. Mary is just one person serving so many different people. If Hope Harbor is needed, we are ready and willing to assist her in any way possible. We are going to move on now to legal advocacy. Legal advocacy refers to advocacy that occurs if a survivor chooses to move through the court system to seek justice for their abuse. In this case, Hope Harbor employs a specific advocate to help survivors through the court system. Her name is Cindy Sellers. Cindy has more than 20 years experience helping survivors through the legal system. She's not a lawyer, but can be present to advocate for a survivor in the court system. Sometimes something as simple as explaining to the survivor what court location to report to, who to look for when they arrive, or what is going on in the courtroom around them can greatly ease a survivor's stress. Cindy has spent her career building up an arsenal of expertise and knowledge to share with survivors in order to ease their stress as they move through the court system. Referrals to Cindy can be made by calling the crisis line or the office directly. The final direct client resource we provide is external referrals. Hope Harbor specializes in working with survivors of sexual violence, but sometimes survivors have deeper needs than just dealing with sexual trauma. We maintain partnerships with community agencies all around the BRAD and are able to refer clients to services that meet their needs that are non-sexual trauma related. Our area's domestic violence shelters and service providers, BRASS, Barren River Area Safe Space, and the Barren River Area Child Advocacy Center are two agencies that we refer to often. We will also refer folks to Mary Kate White as appropriate. I have listed some more examples for your reference. Our goal is always to ensure that survivors' needs are met, and we will always work towards that goal, even if the work needs to continue for the survivor without us being directly involved. Outside of direct survivor services, we also provide services to the community at large. These include outreach and education, both to community members through tabling events like Pride and the International Festival in Bowling Green, and to our area school districts with our Green Dot program. Another way we accomplish this is through our volunteer program, which gets community members directly involved in the fight to end sexual violence in several different capacities. The third, and perhaps most pressing way for you all, is our professional development program, which is the service I'm currently providing to you right now. I work with our community partners to ensure they are informed about Hope Harbor services, best practices when working with survivors and impacted community members, and can spot and react to the aftermath of sexual violence in a trauma-informed way. Moving right along, this slide shows the 3 rape crisis centers who share territory with Post 15. Let me go ahead and pull up this interactive map, which can be accessed by anyone at KSAPP.org. KSAPP stands for the Kentucky Association of Sexual Assault Programs and is the state coalition that all rape crisis centers in Kentucky operate under. This map shows the regions of the state and which centers cover which area. Kentucky is split into 15 districts with state-recognized rape crisis centers to serve all of them. Although Hope Harbor does not work directly with other rape crisis centers, we are governed by the same laws and serve the same populations, so our programming and practices are usually similar. Getting back to the map, if you click on the individual districts, a pop-up will appear with links to the center's website and other contact information for hospitals and resources in the region. I'll start here with Region 4, which is Hope Harbor's region. You can see Metcalfe and Monroe County is included in this region. And now that I've clicked on it, you can see here the link to Hope Harbor and our website. Moving on, let's look at Region 5. Region 5 is covered by Silverleaf Sexual Trauma Recovery Services, which overlaps with Post-15's jurisdiction in Marion and Washington counties. Here, you can see the link to Silverleaf's website. I have contact information for Silverleaf on the next slide. The final center that overlaps with Post-15's territory is Adanta Sexual Assault Resource Center. That's in Region 14. There we go. As you can see, many of their counties overlap with yours. Here is the link to their website. If you take a closer look at Region 14, you'll see that Adair, Casey, Clinton, Cumberland, Greene, Russell, and Taylor counties are all in Region 14. Again, contact information for Adanta is on the next slide. Here is the contact information for Silverleaf and Adanta. If you want, go ahead and pause the video to look over this information. Hope Harbor can also assist in making contact with either of these centers if necessary. Having gone over all of that, let's move on to talking about advocacy as it's written into Kentucky state law. Before I begin, if you want to read these laws in their entirety, visit KSAPP.org again and look under their resources tab for the Sex Crimes Law book. I have linked it here. And I'll go ahead and show it to you if I can. The Sex Crimes Law book was compiled in collaboration with KSAPP's staff lawyer and is a comprehensive collection of all Kentucky state laws and regulations that govern crimes of sexual nature, and all laws regarding advocacy can be found here. I have pulled some of the most prescient ones on the next slide, but if you're a glutton for punishment and want to read law jargon directly, the KSAPP Sex Crimes Law book is an excellent resource. I'm just going to run through these laws and regulations to demonstrate the legal obligations of advocates in sexual violence situations. KRS 216B.400 refers to emergency care and the obligation of advocates to provide services to survivors. 920 KIR 2:010, Section 9, lines A and B outline the obligation of advocates in the legal and medical setting. KRS 211.608 explains advocates' obligation to total confidentiality except for in very specific circumstances. And finally, KRS 421.570 outlines the prohibition against advocates giving legal advice to survivors or acting as legal counsel in any capacity. Again, please feel free to pause this video now to go over these in more detail, or to visit KSAPP.org to find the book I showed you earlier. Now we can move on to discussing advocates themselves. It is important for advocates to be as clear as possible with law enforcement regarding what our roles in certain spaces are to alleviate stress and frustration on both ends. To start, you should know that advocates who work with Hope Harbor are community members from all walks of life. We do not accept volunteers nor employees who live outside of our service area. This ensures all advocates are connected to the work as a community member. Now, aside from passing through the selection and training/certification process, our only requirements for advocates are that they be over 18 years of age and reside in our service area. Advocates come from all walks of life and range from college students to retirees. The majority of our advocates identify as women, but advocates can be any gender. All Hope Harbor employees are also advocates, and we take turns staffing the crisis line and going on hospital calls with survivors. However, much of our operations is actually reliant on our volunteer base. We generally have a group of about 30 volunteers who help with everything from office work to maintaining our center's garden to fundraising and outreach events. Most importantly, volunteers staff our crisis line and go out on hospital advocacy calls. Our volunteers are rigorously vetted before acceptance and go through a state-mandated 40-hour training. This is the same training our employees receive, and as a result, volunteers are considered advocates under Kentucky state law, despite not being Hope Harbor employees. Next, I'll go over what advocates do. Law enforcement officers interact with advocates most often in the hospital setting, so we'll use that as our basis. As we already discussed, in hospital advocacy, advocates work to make sure survivor rights are respected by everyone they interact with, and that they have all the information necessary to give informed consent before receiving treatment. If a survivor chooses to have a safe exam, the advocate informs them of what the exam is, how it works, and their options in regards to deciding whether to report their assault or not. We also stress to them that the safe exam is not a test to determine if assault occurred or not. There are many ways assault can occur that do not leave physical evidence. We also strive to make sure survivors understand the timeline of events that will happen to them next, and that there is no statute of limitations in Kentucky to report sexual abuse. Additionally, we provide that emotional, informational, and material support I mentioned earlier in the form of resource information, education, and when necessary, clothing. We also make sure the survivor knows that they are not legally required to report their abuse, submit to the safe exam, or speak with law enforcement if they don't want to. This is often very frustrating for law enforcement officers, and I can certainly appreciate why. Advocates would never intentionally stand in the way of law enforcement getting the necessary information to conduct an investigation. However, we firmly believe that survivors should not be made to relive the facts of their assault if they are not ready and willing. And oftentimes the hospital is not the ideal setting for these discussions. Our main goal is always to support and advocate for the survivor's comfort and what they want, even if what a survivor wants at the time is not conducive to an investigation being conducted or an arrest made. Above all, we maintain complete confidentiality for all survivors at all times. Advocates should never discuss the facts of the situation, the survivor's personal details, or anything the survivor has told them with anyone, whether that be law enforcement, medical personnel, or the survivor's loved ones. This is true of advocacy in every setting. Moving on here, just as there is a lot of confusion about what advocates do, there is also misinformation and misunderstanding about what advocates do not do. I want to take this opportunity to clear some of that up. First and foremost, advocates do not in any way decide the legitimacy of any allegation. Hope Harbor is not an investigative body. Our role is always to believe survivors, no matter what they do or do not tell us. This obviously differs from law enforcement and can sometimes cause frustration for our law enforcement partners, specifically in the hospital advocacy setting. However, as advocates, we cannot and will not discuss the legitimacy of allegations or the facts of the case with law enforcement officers or anyone else at any time. Advocates never have an opinion about whether something actually happened because those facts are none of our concern. We do not need to legitimize suffering to provide support. If someone tells us they need support for something that has happened to them, we will provide. Aside from that, advocates are not qualified to make such determinations. We are not interviewers, detectives, forensics experts, or judges, and as such, we are not qualified to determine if something, quote unquote, really happened. Next, Hope Harbor does not report abuse to any agency in any capacity. This ties right back into our obligation to confidentiality. If a survivor chooses to report to law enforcement or someone else, we can give them the tools and information that may help them through that process, but we cannot report instances of violence at any time. This also extends to our community partners. Hope Harbor does not ever directly report any community partner or partnering agency to their governing authorities, unless the conduct of those agencies is astronomically harmful or illegal. We are committed to educating and supporting our community partners to allow them to become the best versions of ourselves, not to punishing mistakes or getting anyone in trouble. Moving on, advocates do not give advice to survivors at any time in our advocacy. This may sound counterintuitive, but learning to have open-ended discussions that allow survivors to process their opinions and their options and to come to their own decision is part of the training we go through to become advocates. As we saw earlier in Kentucky state law, we are strictly prohibited from giving any legal advice, and we extend that standard to any part of the survivor's decision-making process. We in no way wish to influence their decision-making. We only strive to make sure that they have access to all knowledge and tools necessary to make informed decisions for themselves. Finally, we do not work directly with law enforcement when providing direct survivor services. Obviously, we maintain a partnership with law enforcement agencies to promote understanding and goodwill between our agencies. We sometimes are even able to provide agencies with supplies necessary for the investigation of sexual violence. This year, in 2021, we purchased cameras and evidence collection kits for one of our smaller local police departments. We have nothing but respect for officers who fight the good fight to end sexual violence in our communities alongside us. However, because of the legal expectations placed on advocates, we cannot assist law enforcement with their investigation directly, nor can we provide them with any information regarding survivor status, communications, or contact information. To wrap up, let's discuss the goals of advocates versus the goals of law enforcement. It is of utmost importance to advocates that survivors have the best experience they can as they move through the process of recovering from sexual violence. Our goal as advocates boils down to advocating for survivors' rights under the law and breaking down barriers that keep survivors from seeking help and ultimately from recovering. This differs from your goals as Kentucky State Police. Law enforcement, while also focused on serving survivors, have different goals from advocates based solely on the nature of your work. You are obligated to uphold the law of the land and seek justice for survivors through the legal system. Your goals are therefore driven by the legal system. You need to interview a survivor so you can start your investigation. You need to rehash the details of the assault for the 10th time because you need to make sure you have all the details necessary to make a sound arrest that will lead to a successful prosecution. You need to move as quickly as possible because you have 20 other cases sitting on your desk that also require immediate attention. Advocates just don't work like that. We are able to put all of our attention and resources into a survivor for as long as necessary, and our goals are driven by what the survivor wants, not by state laws. This is not to say that there is one correct way to serve a survivor. Both of our roles are absolutely necessary, but this friction between us can naturally lead to frustration between advocates and officers. Based on the goals and obligations of our positions, we are not able to assist each other. You as a police officer cannot necessarily support a survivor in the choice not to pursue legal action because it's your duty to uphold the laws of the state of Kentucky, and in the case of sexual violence, a law has obviously been broken. And in turn, advocates cannot encourage survivors to work with the legal system because we are obligated by those same laws to provide unbiased support, information, and resources, not to encourage a survivor to report. Of course, we understand how all of that can be immensely frustrating for our law enforcement compatriots. My goal is not to explain away the frustration you may feel with advocates. I'll be frank with you, we will probably always be a little frustrating from the police perspective. Instead, my goal is for you to understand why we do the things we do and why we never are against police in any way. We simply cannot be for you. Rather, we are obligated to remain a neutral party for the benefit of the survivor. This concludes this presentation about the relationship between advocacy and law enforcement. I hope this information was informative and makes your next interaction with an advocate even a little bit better. On this final slide, you can see all Hope Harbor contact information. Please do not hesitate to reach out to our agency for assistance, information, or services for yourself if that's something you could benefit from, or for one of the people you serve. The top number is the fastest way to request an advocate. That is our 24/7 crisis hotline. That number is 270-846-1100. I have also included our office number, which is staffed Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. That number is the fastest way to directly reach a Hope Harbor employee if you want to inquire about specific services or make a referral. Below that is my name, extension number, and email address. As Systems Advocacy Specialist, I am the main point of contact for any and all law enforcement personnel. I would be happy to hear from you to discuss the information from this video or to answer any questions you may have. I'm at extension number 21 of our office number, and my email is mclark@hopeharbor.net. Below that is the link to Hope Harbor's website. There you can find more information about our location, services, mission, and history. That's www.hopeharbor.net. Finally, there are the street addresses for all Hope Harbor locations for your reference. Thank you for making it to the end of this presentation. Again, please don't hesitate to reach out if you have questions or want to request more information. I wish you a pleasant and safe rest of your day, and thank you for your continued dedication to serving survivors and ending sexual violence in our community.